Hi, everybody. Oh, good morning, everyone. It's very nice to see you. I have a new name. I'm Karen Linnell, and I've been Jerry Barkley too long anyway. And it's my very great pleasure. It's my very great pleasure to introduce Ellen Cogen Lipton, who is a member of the Michigan State Board of Education. She was a member of the House of Representatives for 3 consecutive terms, and she is dear to my heart, hailed as the hero of public education. Uh, she has long fought attacks on public institutions to ensure that every Michigander has the opportunity to achieve an excellent education and to thrive in Michigan. As a member of the Michigan House of Representatives, she led the fight against efforts to privatize public schools in Michigan. Her tireless work led to a close examination of the inequities in the current system of school funding. Ms. Lipson was named Legislator of the Year by the Michigan Probate Judges Association, an environmental champion by the Michigan Sierra Club, and Clean Water Hero by Michigan Clean Water Action. As a hero of public education, Ms. Lipton will discuss the fallacies of the DeVos back in amendment, really let Michigan kids learn. And she will talk about Michigan School Superintendent Michael Rice's plan to diversify social studies, history, and English curriculums to better mirror the facts of American history. So, with that, I give you the wonderful Ellen Cogen Lipton.
Thank you, Jerry. I really appreciate that. The feeling is definitely mutual. I am a big fan of yours. I love to speak to groups of educators because in my experience, educators get it. A lot of the things that I tell you will come as no surprise, but I hope that you will come out of this discussion with a better understanding of the pressures and how we came to be at this point, because we are at a rather critical point in the juncture of education in Michigan, and what things that people can do. I'm a firm believer that knowledge is power. And to the extent that I can give you all some information that might help to inform where we go from here. So the first thing that I want to address, and it might be the elephant in the room, it usually is when I speak as a State Board of Education member, and that is, what the heck does the State Board of Education do? I get that a lot. And in fact, when I was first asked to run for the State Board of Education, I had to really give it some hard thinking, because coming out of the legislature, where I was very hands-on in terms of serving on the education policy committees and also on the education school aid appropriations committee, the purse strings of the of education, if you will, in Michigan, I really had to think long and hard about whether I would just be eternally frustrated on the State Board of Education. So I want to answer that question first, because it is a question that's legitimate. The State Board of Education has immense powers, but no powers. And let me explain that. The genesis of the State Board of Education is embedded in our Michigan Constitution of 1963. Okay, so we are constitutionally authorized. That is a really, really good indication that the state wants to have this set up when something is embedded in the state constitution. And I'll just read briefly from Section 3 of Article 8, Section 3 of our 1964 state constitution: leadership and general supervision over all public education, including adult education and instructional programs in state institutions. That would mean like prisons and hospitals and things like that, except as to institutions of higher education, meaning our state universities, granting baccalaureate degrees, is vested in a State Board of Education. That is very, very clear language. It shall serve as the general planning and coordinating body for all public education, including higher education, and shall advise the legislature as to the financial requirements in connection therewith. It is a very, very clear statement, clear as mud. Okay. And what I mean by that is, how has that been interpreted over the years? As you know, we don't have the purse strings. The legislature has the purse strings. And in education, being a very labor-intensive endeavor, we do not do education. We should not try to do education on the cheap, although we have a history of that since about the 1990s. So the legislature controls the purse strings. We also have a very unique structure in Michigan, a governance structure that is called local control. Now, people throw that around a lot as an excuse to do something or not do something, but let me be very clear. Local control means that the money flows directly from the legislature to our school districts to implement the curriculum that is selected at the local level in accordance with the standards which are implemented by the State Board of Education, and of course, in accordance with the desires of what any governor tries and tries not to do with respect to education, meaning impressing upon the legislature to enact certain policies that can have a profound effect. We are unique. Not only, I'm not going to say we're unique in being a local control state, but we are unique in the governance structure of our State Board of Education. We are a branch of the administration. Okay, we're not a legislative branch. We're not a judicial branch. We are an administrative branch, meaning that we are a department, the MDE, Michigan Department of Education, which, like any administrative department, is empowered with carrying out the laws. However, we are unique in Michigan in being the only state that elects the State Board of Education members statewide. There are 8 of us. We are not appointed by the legislature. We are not appointed by the governor. We are elected statewide by the people. And we are empowered with hiring and firing the superintendent of public instruction. Now think about that for a minute. The superintendent of public instruction has a seat at the governor's table because they are a member of the cabinet. But I'm going to use air quotes when I say member of the cabinet. Because think about it, every other cabinet position is appointed by the governor under whom they serve. The superintendent of public instruction is not hired and fired by the governor, is not hired and fired by the legislature, hired and fired by the State Board of Education, elected by the people. Now, you might think that is crazy. And sometimes I do think it's crazy because it does create a very awkward situation. For example, when you have this is not a partisan discussion, but if you have a Republican governor and a superintendent of public instruction who answers to a democratically controlled State Board of Education, some strange relationships can happen. Okay. Now, I believe that in the wisdom of the people that came together to draft our 1963 Constitution, I believe that that was an intentional, that the awkwardness, the trifurcation of who answers to whom was done intentionally, because people understood in 1963, which was the high point of progressive education reform. Think about it. Civil rights was on people's minds, women's rights was on people's minds, and a lot of state constitutions were being rewritten through the lens of a progressive viewpoint of state governance. And they believed that education as an agency, a department in state government, was inherently different than Department of Agriculture or Department of Health and Human Services or Department of Transportation. Education, our young children, our future, is different than making sure the trains run on time. And as a result, this unique governance structure was created, in my opinion, to create different pressures so that there could not be one king, if you will, or queen over public education, which we see in other states. You only have to turn on the news to look at education policy in other states. Things can happen a lot more quickly and efficiently if you have a governor appointing a state superintendent answerable to the governor. You can also have very different pressures when you have a state control of public education, meaning that the State Board of Education, through the Michigan Department of Education, does not have any authority to tell a local school district how to spend their dollars. We have over 500 traditional public school districts in the state. And if you count charter schools, which I'm not going to get into charter schools right now, but we have a sort of a wild west of charter schools in the state. So we have over 300 charter schools that are governed by private boards. They are unelected bodies. So if you add those together, you've got over 800 individual school districts in the state that have the right to spend their education dollars as they see fit. And the State Board of Education, except by statute, when a district falls into financial insolvency, has no right to step in. We can advise through the intermediate school districts, which is another layer of governance in the state that most people don't understand. But intermediate school districts are like what they sound. They generally operate as an aggregation of local school districts at the county level, although there are 83 counties in the state and only 52 intermediate school districts, which means that some ISDs cover more than one county. Oakland County has one intermediate school district called the Oakland Schools. And again, the ISDs, by state law, may not come in and tell a local school district what to do. They can only be asked to come in and partner with the local school district on issues of commonality, like special education, like transportation, like finance, but it is a permissible relationship. It is not mandatory. Okay, so that is, I see a question in the chat, which I'm going to. Okay, the state superintendent does have a stated length of term, and that is based on the contract that we, as the State Board of Education, are charged with negotiating. And some contracts have been as short as 1 year, and most contracts are as long as 5 years. But that is contractually based. And that job is given to the State Board of Education in our Constitution to hire and fire the state superintendent. Okay, that is all I want to say at the moment on governance. I will quickly talk about statutory obligations of the State Board of Education. They mirror the constitutional obligations, meaning that they are as clear as mud. They are very broadly sweeping in terms of, oh, you shall oversee all public instruction. And yet, in a local control model, you have very little authority to hold anyone accountable, which means that our advisory capacity is permissible. How does that come to play in terms of our relationship with local school districts? The way it comes to play is that the State Board of Education, we meet once a month on the second Tuesday of every month. Our meetings are open to the public. And because of the pandemic, it used to be that people who wanted to attend and have public comment had to drive all the way to Lansing. That has been changed. People can register 24 hours in advance on the State Board of Education website, which is a page of the Michigan Department of Education website, and they can give public comment virtually, by telephone, or in person. And let me tell you, as the local school districts were dealing with mask mandates and all of this drama about whether schools are teaching critical race studies, critical race theory or not, we heard hours upon hours upon hours of public comment on these issues. But again, most of the public comment was centering around what was happening at a local school district. So think about it. People are coming to the State Board of Education thinking that the State Board of Education can actually do something about the curriculum of an individual school district. And what did I just tell you? We can't. But what we can do in this general advisory capacity is that we can publish resolutions. And we do publish resolutions on a variety of issues. And let me just give you some examples. So the State Board of Education can speak its wishes and desires through the resolutions and statements that we make. I forgot to say one thing, so let me just backtrack a second. We are unique among the states in how our State Board of Education members are elected. We do not run in primaries. Like the Secretary of State and like the Attorney General and like the ed boards of the three higher ed institutions of MSU, U of M, and Wayne State, we are nominated by our parties, party nomination, and then we run on the statewide ballot. We do not run in primaries. Okay? So we are nominated and we run as partisans. Unlike judges who are nominated by the parties and run as nonpartisans. We are not on the nonpartisan ballot. We're on the partisan ballot. Currently, we are a 6-2 board, 6 Democrats, 2 Republicans. Okay, I just wanted to make that statement. Okay. As I said, the State Board of Education speaks through policy statements and resolutions. Just let me give you some brief examples of some of the policies. In December of 2020, right before I got on the board, my term, I was elected in November of 2020 and my term began along with the other new member of the board, Jason Strayhorn, January 1st, 2021. The first 8 months of our meetings were virtual because of the pandemic. December 2020. Oh, and one other thing, we are elected for an 8-year term. That's a long term. 8-year terms. And again, that was in our Constitution, I believe, for the purpose of sending a signal that the State Board of Education is a different sort of animal. By not running every 2 years, the idea is to get beyond the 2-year cycle of campaigns that the legislature is in, or even the 4-year cycle that the state Senate is in, and the governor and all the other elected positions. We're unique in 8-year terms. So just to give you an example, I'm not going to go through all the resolutions, but in December 2020, the State Board of Education sent a resolution to the legislature and the governor embodying a model anti-bullying policy. The legislature had passed an anti-bullying law. It was very unclear. And the State Board of Education, in its wisdom, I wasn't on the board at that time, but prior members decided to use the research that it had at its disposal, because the Michigan Department of Education has career educators on staff. They are knowledgeable about education practice and theory. And as the Michigan Department of Education, although it's the smallest it's ever been, is about 350 employees. It was about double that prior to the Engler years. But in 1992, Engler did former Governor Engler did a massive reorganization, took a lot of the financial authority and oversight from schools, financial oversight meaning review of the finances, took that from the Michigan Department of Education and moved it by executive order to DTMB, Department of Technology Management and Budget. And that is, they are serving at the will of the governor. The DTMB director is appointed by the governor. That's a political appointment. Okay, so some other statements that the State Board of Education has promulgated. In December of 2020, they also promulgated a statement regarding the lame duck legislative session. Basically, there was some concern that the legislature was going to do some last minute midnight education changes as the legislature, a new legislature, a new governor really came into being. And so, or I'm sorry, not a new governor, a new legislature would come into being. And the concern was that they would try to do some mischief. And so the State Board of Education made a resolution about advising the legislature what they should and shouldn't do. But remember, these resolutions are advisory only. They do get sent as a matter of course to the governor and to every member of the legislature, all 148 members, but they are advisory in nature. Many legislators can take that resolution and boom, right into the round file. One of the resolutions that I'm really proud of that we passed in March of 2021 was a resolution on waivers associated with state summative assessments and high stakes accountability measures during a pandemic. The department at the behest of the State Board of Education, asked for a federal waiver on giving state summative assessments. That waiver was not granted by the federal government. And so we implored the legislature to remove the high stakes attached with those state summative assessments. And as many of you who are educators will know, that schools are graded A through F based on the test scores of their student population. That is a legislative, that is in law, that was done by the legislature. Back when I believe it was done a year or two after I left in 2014 or 2016. Teachers, 40% of their evaluation under state law is determined by the standardized test score of their student, including teachers for which students do not take a standardized test on that subject. Think about that for a minute. You're a Spanish teacher and you're under state law, 40% of your evaluation under state law is supposed to come from the standardized test score of a student who may not even take Spanish. Those high, what I call high stakes attached to those standardized tests have been suspended during the pandemic. I would argue that they should be repealed permanently. Most of the research that we have on standardized tests tells us that at the most, a teacher influences 10% of how that student performs on a standardized test at the highest. So why are we using the standardized test to account for 40% of the educator's evaluation under state law? The good news is that 40% has never fully been realized, because the year it was supposed to go into effect was 2020, and it has been suspended ever since. But I would ask, we have a law on the books that we have suspended for several years now. And in that time, we realize that there are many factors other than effectiveness of a teacher that influence how a child does on a standardized test. And perhaps we should use other things like student growth or the amount a student has learned as a proxy or as a measure or as one measure of a teacher. I would argue that a standardized test is a very poor measure of much of anything other than the socioeconomic status of the family that that child comes from. And there's a lot of research on that, but certainly not 40%. Okay, it looks like I am coming to the end of my time. So I want to just run through some other issues very quickly. The State Board of Education, prior to my getting there, underwent a statewide strategic plan. It is visible on the website. I think it's a really good strategic plan. And it's called Michigan's Top 10 Plan. And the strategic plan, I believe, is the best written indication of the goals and metrics that the state board is using to measure education in the state of Michigan. What I mean by that is every month we get a presentation on one of our stated goals in our strategic plan. And we look at the metrics in that are outlined in our state strategic plan in terms of how we're doing. So let me give you some examples. But if you're interested, it's on the Department of Education website under Michigan's top 10 strategic education plan. And it was a 4-year effort by the department and the State Board of Education. Over 12,000 stakeholders were engaged. So this was not something that people did in a bubble. Guiding principles, I'm just going to go through them really quickly. All students have access to high quality instruction. All educators are encouraged to be creative and innovative. All students are encouraged to express their creativity. All students are provided every opportunity to achieve the broadest range of life dreams. Families and communities are essential partners. And in support of students and their achievement, the Michigan Department of Education is coordinated, aligned, and properly resourced, and collaborates with school districts. Take note of that word, collaborates with school districts, and a wide range of partners and stakeholders. Okay, those are guiding principles. I'm not going to go through all of the goals, but I'm just going to pick out a few just to give you some view about what we review on a monthly basis based on the department's field work. Okay. One of our goals is to expand early childhood learning opportunities. Okay. But we have a metric to measure that on a monthly basis as to how we're doing. And we look at the number and percent of children served in GSRP, Great State Readiness Program, and the number of children eligible for Great State Readiness Program. I will say the good news is that in the governor's budget that has yet to be passed by the Senate or the House, the governor's budget recognizes that we have more 3- and 4-year-olds than are served by our GSRP program and has asked for an increase in funding. Remember, this is one of those areas that is completely based on funding. More funding equals more slots. More slots means more children can get served. Simple as that. What we do at the department is we also monitor the quality. And that is done in state statute. If you look at the GSRP statute, the money goes from the legislature to the certified childcare providers. And these are our center-based healthcare providers. GSRP is not home-based healthcare, home-based childcare. And as a result, under the statute, they meaning the GSRP center-based providers must have certain ratios of certified childcare providers to students and must meet certain benchmarks in terms of what they teach and what needs to happen in a day. And we get reports on that. Yes, question. Jerry, can you unmute? Can you unmute so I can hear your question?
Ellen?
Now can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I wanted you to address this Let Michigan Kids Learn initiative for a minute or two.
Okay. So I will just skip to that in the last minute or two. Okay. When I talked about we are at a critical point in our state education, what I mean by that is the education reform movement that began in the 1990s and was really spearheaded by Michiganders Betsy DeVos when she was chair of the Michigan Republican Party, and John Engler when he was governor of Michigan. They implemented or had a vision for education in Michigan that has slowly been implemented over these past 30 years. The vision of education really involves a much more substantial privatization of public education. And in our state, if you look at the trajectory of other states that have gone along this path, the closest to us would be Ohio. It usually begins with charter schools as sort of a test case of people's tolerance for sending their children to schools that are publicly funded but privately run. Because charter schools, although people will say they are public schools, they are only public in the sense that they're paid for by our taxpayer dollars. They are privately run. Their boards are private and they are not publicly elected boards. Okay. In Michigan, we have a particularly pernicious charter school statute, meaning that nobody has the authority to oversee charter schools except the authorizers. And the authorizers get 3% off the top of what the charter school makes. So there's a quid pro quo in the authorization agreement. So there are no authorizers to date that have really done very much about closing bad charter schools. They're the only ones that have the authority to close bad charter schools, but the financial incentive to close a bad charter school is just not there. So we have about 300 and some odd individual charter schools in Michigan. The vast majority, 90% plus, are for-profit institutions. Okay, we passed a charter school statute in 1993. It was capped. In 2010, the cap came off, meaning that it became the Wild West of charters. And if you look at the trajectory of school privatization in every state, vouchers always follow charters. Okay, vouchers always follow charters. And when I say vouchers, I mean people literally get a voucher to send their child to a public, charter, and most importantly, parochial or non-public private school. That is the goal, and that is the ultimate privatization of education. State-funded vouchers going to families to send their kids to private and parochial schools. Bills creating a voucher scheme were passed this past fall by both chambers, passed by the by the state house and the state senate. They were vetoed by the governor. Okay, that then set them up for what's called a citizen initiative. We have a quirk in our Constitution. We are unique among the states that if you collect a certain number of signatures in a set period of time, a proposal can go to the legislature for review, and they can pass it on a simple majority vote, and it is veto proof by the governor. It is veto proof by the governor. Betsy DeVos, we know now because of filings, has put in what we know of $850,000 to pay petition circulators. And these petition circulators are out in full force. Many of you may have been approached by them. I get calls all the time. And there is no law against misleading people to sign a petition. There is no law against paying people $2 and $3 a signature. And this particular citizen initiative, and I clarify that this is a citizen initiative, it's not a ballot initiative, meaning it will never come to the voters to vote on it. That's another misnomer that people are thinking, oh, well, big deal. I signed the petition, but I would vote against it. It's not going to come to the ballot. It's not a ballot initiative. This is a citizen petition. And if they get 390,047 signatures by June 1st, and they seem to be on track to do that, they will present it to the legislature. And with 100% certainty, the legislature will approve it. And I will end on that. We will be doing a resolution at the state board level at our May meeting next week. I drafted a resolution, and we will have the votes amongst our Democratic colleagues. Oh, how many signatures are needed? 390,047. We will be doing a resolution and doing some press around the resolution, urging people to decline to sign. We are not allowed to promote or speak out against a political initiative, something we cannot do that with state dollars, but we can tell people the facts of the petition. And we can also suggest that people simply not sign the petition, because that is in their right. So with that, I guess I will end it unless there are any questions. It looks like some people have had to leave. I hope this has been informative.
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
I have a
Yes.
question. Could you just briefly speak to the school superintendent's idea, plan, which sounds wonderful, of diversifying the curriculum to include America's true past?
Yes. Under one of the goals of our state strategic plan, which I mentioned, it is to provide a safe and inclusive environment for all children. 90% of our teachers are white women, and 30 some odd percent, just under 40% of our students are students of color. Not to say that a white woman is not an effective teacher, but we recognize, again, by looking at the data of our teachers, that we were not doing a good job of teaching a racially inclusive curriculum such that our students of color were even thinking about going into teaching. And we based it on research done, which talks about if a student can see themselves in a teacher, they are more likely to A, do well in school, and B, consider teaching. And so one of our metrics now is to look at how we are recruiting teachers of color and how we are supporting them in teaching a curriculum that allows students to see themselves reflected in the books that they are reading, and that we're providing windows to the world that they may not be exposed to, and sliding glass doors of avenues like teaching that they can step into. So it is based on really being intentional about recruiting and supporting teachers in our minority communities. We've got several grow your own pilot programs in Detroit and Flint that are showing very, very positive signs in recruiting minority teachers. We also have done a series of professional development courses for our teachers, so that teachers who perhaps are white and maybe more affluent can learn how to teach and include a more robust curriculum for their students. Those professional development sessions occurred in May. They were extremely well attended. I mean, it was standing room only, and we'll be including those professional development sessions for teachers throughout the summer. That is a great time for teachers to take part in professional development. And finally, through our relationship with the Michigan Library of Science, they are also funded by the Department of Education. We, on a monthly basis, send to all school districts, all 800 of them, book lists that have been peer reviewed and are deemed to be inclusive on a number of marginalized communities. And finally, we passed a resolution at the state board level. We passed a resolution basically confirming the department's commitment to teaching a age-appropriate and racially inclusive history in our state. Can we list the citizen ballot petitions for our members? I believe the website that, let me just check and see. I think it's called Let MI Kids Learn, which is kind of a misnomer, but
That's right.
is that correct? Let MI Kids Learn.
Let my kids learn.
Yeah.
A and B. There's two.
Yes, it's a two-part ballot initiative. One that sets up the voucher, and then the other that funds it. So it was reflective of the two bills that were passed in the House and Senate. So
Well, for your information, AAUW's board went on the record as opposing several initiated laws, one of which was My Kids Learn, back in November when it was first out there.
Yes, that is correct. The bills were vetoed by the governor in November. They immediately had the language. They went to the Board of Canvassers. They got approval pretty quickly, and I think they waited until the weather to break. But they're out. I mean, I get calls a lot. They're out at supermarkets. They're out at
Yes,
sporting events. Not just that one. I mean, there's a bunch of, but that is one that is being funded by paid petition circulators. So when you are being paid to collect signatures, you may be more aggressive. You may, be more, willing to maybe stretch the truth a little bit. So just be aware of that. Let me just see if I can find the link. Let me just see if I Google Let My Kids Learn. That may give me the link of the language of the ballot initiative. Let My Kids Learn. Okay, I'm going to put it in the chat here. www.letmykidlearn.com. Now, just be aware that this is the website of the people that are promoting it. So you're going to see it. Yes, you're going to see the language of the petition, but you're going to see a lot of language that is couched in a way that, it's going to give parents a lot of freedom. Isn't this going to be so great? That it will allow parents to buy extra services for their special ed students. I want to remind you, as to special ed, that most parochial and for-profit charter schools will not even accept special ed students. So, you know, having a voucher to pay a parochial school is not worth the paper it's printed on, because they won't take the kids. And just to put a number on it, if this voucher citizen initiative is passed, if it's presented to the legislature and passes, it will divert, the Senate Fiscal Agency predicts it will divert $500 million a year from public funding. It will divert $500 million from our state budget, which funds, obviously, public schools and a whole lot of other things. So I always tell people, because I've had some people say, oh, you know, the guy said it's going to help, you know, the person came to me and said, oh, it's going to help special ed students. And in fact, a lot of the circulators are coming out and saying, don't you want to help special ed students? And who doesn't want to help special ed students? I mean, of course we want to help special ed students. But I tell people the best way to help special ed students, about 18% of our student body has an IEP, is by fully funding our traditional community, locally elected school board governed public schools. And anything that takes money away from that is going to have an adverse impact on gen ed as well as special ed students.
Ellen,
Yeah,
doesn't this sort of defy the separation between church and state? You're giving money, public monies, to parochial schools. Let's face it, it's parochial schools that get it too, not only the charters.
yes, that's correct. And Mary made a very good point.
She always does.
Yep, also keep in mind, under the language of the initiative, all students will get a voucher or will be eligible for this, what they call opportunity scholarship. They tend to not use the term voucher because it doesn't poll well, but they'll use the term opportunity scholarship. But public school students will get, I believe it's $500, and parochial and private schools, I believe, get 3 times that. Okay. So the question is, isn't this unconstitutional? The people that are behind this are very, very clever. They have modeled their voucher on language that has passed constitutional muster in other states that also have similar constitutional prohibitions on public funds going to private education. Like Michigan. Michigan has that prohibition. Other states do. And the reason why they think that they have gotten around it, but again, it will be challenged constitutionally in Michigan. And a lot depends on how our Michigan Supreme Court comes down on it. Okay, every case is different, but they've modeled the language as follows. The public, the money that's getting donated is getting donated to a nonprofit opportunity scholarship corporation that then grants that business or person or not high net worth individual a tax credit. Okay. That educational opportunity scholarship corporation then issues the scholarship voucher to the family. And they believe that by doing it this way, this indirect way. In other states, that has passed their state's constitutional review. In Michigan, we won't know until, because you can't prospectively challenge something constitutionally. You have to wait until it goes into effect, and then you challenge it, and then you take it up to our Michigan Supreme Court. So, putting on my lawyer hat, if I had to guess, under the current political breakdown of our Supreme Court, I believe it would not pass. But two of our Supreme Court justices are up for reelection. And so if the political breakdown of our Supreme Court, because they are nominated by their respective political parties, even though they run on a nonpartisan ballot, can always change. And just like we see with Roe v. Wade, when a court makes a decree, there's always the chance that a later court will say it's constitutional. So it's not something to be taken lightly, in my opinion.
Well, Ellen, thank you so very much. We've taken up enough of your time, and I really appreciate your
No, it was my pleasure. My pleasure. Anytime.
and thank you so much.
Yes, you're very, very welcome.
Okay,
You're very welcome. Have a great day, everyone.
you too. And it is a great day. I think it's sunny out.
Yeah, it is beautiful.
Okay. Everybody, thank you for attending, and I will see you soon, I'm sure. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for setting this up. It's a good program.